Welcome, everyone, to the Whole Wellness Mama Summit, where we're unlocking the healthiest, joy filled mom in you using strategies from various wellness and parenting experts. And I'm Amy Nesbitt. Mom guilt and shame is way too real. So I'm excited to discuss today how to get beyond shame to craft a life of joy and self love with Kyira Wackett. She is a licensed mental health therapist specializing in shame resilience and in radical acceptance. And as the founder of Adversity Rising, she works to empower and equip people with the insight, confidence, and skills to write their own stories. And her work ranges from one on one coaching to corporate wellness with a focus on what she calls the anti band aid movement, or resisting that quick fix in favor of meaningful and sustainable changes. And that's truly what we want, isn't it? And central to her work is her acclaimed program, That Life AR, a transformative 5-step therapeutic process guiding participants through this profound introspection and actionable strategies. She equips them with the tools to navigate life's inevitable challenges with grace and resilience. So, with her as your guide, you're not just rewriting your story, you're reclaiming your narrative, embracing adversity, and charting a course toward a life of profound fulfillment and resilience. I don't know how else to better put that desire for us moms, because who doesn't want that? And a fun note is I loved communicating with Kara from the very beginning because her email has this blurb at the bottom about respecting boundaries and personal time. And it ends by saying prioritize joy, not email when and where you can. And that spoke volumes to me from the beginning that she included that quote. So, with that, welcome, Kira.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be a part of this.
Oh, we love having you. So, for those meeting you for the first time, I know I shared kind of this quick blurb about you, but can you share more of your story and how you came to where you are?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, sort of each day, there's kind of a different role or roles that kind of come to the surface. And so I think today I'm really leaning into my role as a mom, partner, friend, sort of community member, and business owner. And within all of those different roles, I really see my work in terms of my inner work, my process, the things I'm continuing to grow on, and my offering in all of those roles being this idea of creating safe spaces to explore and to connect. And I think a lot of what I'm doing and how I'm showing up now really came from a lot of early childhood trauma. Being from the Midwest originally, I'm from Wisconsin, and obviously every place that you live has different sort of cultural norms and biases, but a lot of the sort of focus, the theme, what everybody kind of did was we don't really feel emotions. Those are inconvenient. So if you have it, you need to figure out how to get it out of here. We don't talk about that. We sort of just put our heads down, do the work, get things done. And I never really felt seen in a lot of what I was going through some very painful traumatic experiences. And so growing up feeling a little like, okay, so maybe I'm not supposed to talk about things. Maybe I'm not supposed to share. My feelings are an inconvenience. I started to really silence myself, and my narrative became about taking care of everyone else. Okay, so what I'm thinking, feeling, needing is not really what's going to allow me to connect. Instead, I need to make sure I'm taking care of everybody else. And so, obviously, like a lot of people listening to this, I'm sure they're going, oh, I've done that.
Yeah.
I definitely went through that period then of sort of no identity other than the identity that really was about taking care of everyone else. And I think in my early 20s, into my late 20s, and honestly, even into my 30s, it was really starting to experience the tension that exists, that burnout cycle, but not yet being willing to give up what that all meant. Because in my head, that was the way I was gonna have connection and belonging, was making sure I took care of everyone else. And so once I started to make space for that and unpack that, I realized that was very misguided. That was sort of these cultural pressures, these systems of oppression that were making me feel like I didn't have the right to experience my feelings fully. And so how do you shift that? How do you sort of reclaim space to say, I'm not inconvenient for having a feeling, a want, or a need. And I can still be there for other people and make that safe space for them without taking on everything for them to trying to make everything be perfect. So I would say at this point, I'm still very humbly in that I know a lot about how to do it. My skills as a therapist obviously helped me, but really doing my own work has solidified that. And I'm still very much in a journey of learning what does that mean in the new day to day life every day.
Like that's a lifelong journey that it just seems like a few steps forward, a few steps back, and it's kind of
Hmm.
how we go, but we can only do a little bit at a time and aim to get better, right? I love your story. So, can we start at the basics? What is shame? Why do moms tend to feel it? I don't know if we feel it more or it just feels like there is more in moms and women. Where does this shame come from? How is it different from guilt? Well, I just tossed a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Can we start at the basics of what is shame?
Yes. So we'll do shame and then shame versus guilt, and then we can jump into that piece of how, why and how are we feeling it and seemingly more. And so shame is a fear. So everybody's got their back reptilian part of their brain. That's where fear is housed. And what we know is that when we are afraid, when we are anxious, when we are overwhelmed, it basically hijacks our overall brain power and it turns off all our logical thinking, that ability to rationalize, that ability to take a deep breath, because we have just sort of been like, nope, you're going to take too long. It's that, like, if you're going to touch a hot stove, you want this back part of your brain to turn on because it's going to pull your hand away before your logic part of your brain goes, what is the actual temperature? Is it going to burn me? How bad would this be? And so shame is from that part of our brain. So it is a fear-based response, and it's essentially the fear of not being good enough, worthy, or belonging. And the reason that that fear comes to be is essentially from the time that we're born, we are trying to figure out how to belong. As babies, we know that belonging, that connection is as important as food, water, and shelter. We've seen that in the research. We know what happens when people are in isolation. Community is incredibly important. So when you're little, you're starting to figure out, okay, so how do I do this belonging thing? How do I connect? And so you start to see these ways, both direct experiences of maybe people being more excited to be around you when you're acting a certain way, when you look a certain way, and then watching people around you being treated that way, being more desirable or less desirable based on, usually in the beginning, it's behaviors. But as we get older, we see that it's really also how we look, the successes, the check marks. So once we get into school, oh, if I get an A, I'm celebrated more than if I get a D. If I'm in this body type, I'm celebrated more than if I'm in this body type. If I have this racial, ethnic, socioeconomic, gender identity, I'm going to be treated this way versus someone with a different identity. So we start to really pay attention to these things. And again, our brain is trying to figure out how to make sense of that so we belong. So it develops these beliefs about, okay, here's everything that you can do that's in your control. If we can do all this, would be great. Here's also all the knocks against you. So we actually have to amp this side up even more to be okay. So you build this whole system of rules that says, if you can be this and do this, you'll be good enough. You'll have connection. People will love you. They'll accept you in. Shame basically comes in because we're always afraid that we either can't do it or we're going to lose it as soon as we have it. So
Mhm.
shame thinks it's coming in to be helpful, to say, okay, cool, you got this rule book. Let me help you. I'll be the trigger point. I'll set off an alarm every time something happens that puts us at risk. But
Mhm.
basically, what it does is it conditions us to believe we as humans are not good. We are not good enough. We are not worthy enough. We are not lovable enough because we've said, well, look at all these things that you're not doing, or if you don't do, that won't be okay. So if you kind of take all of that and you boil that down, I think for people to just latch onto the idea is that shame is the fear of not being good enough. You as a person not being good enough, not being lovable, not belonging. So you as a person become synonymous with you as one aspect of your identity, one aspect of doing. If you're not getting A's, if you're not married, if you don't have kids, if you don't want more kids, if you, whatever that is. Guilt, on the other hand, it's still a response in our body, it's an emotion, but it's actually a very helpful emotion. Guilt is the idea of, I did something that I don't like. I did something unlovable. I did something unkind. What we know about guilt is it's actually a reflection of whatever we did doesn't feel good in our bodies because it goes against our values. Guilt can be incredibly helpful. Gosh, I feel really guilty that I said this thing to somebody. I don't like how I said that and how it made somebody feel. I can go in and I can want to correct it, or I can want to learn and be better. The difference between guilt and shame at its core is shame again is saying if you do something wrong, you are the problem. You can't fix that because you're just broken and now they're going to see it. Guilt says what you did is a problem and you can learn from it and grow from it. So I'll pause there because I just said a
Yeah.
lot. I answered maybe 2 or 3 of the questions, but
Yes.
there's that initial piece.
Oh no, I love that because it's so true, right? Especially with the ability to compare so much easier with social media or,
Mhm.
all the things we used to compare. Well, I shouldn't say we because I grew up in a time where there wasn't all this social media, right? It was starting, but like our parents still had all of this, right? Our parents or
Yeah.
grandparents still had the comparison with neighbors or whatever. But it's gotten so much worse, and oh, now I feel like I should be saying mom shame, right, instead of mom guilt, because we talk
Yes.
about it on an ongoing basis that we have this mom guilt, but it's actually shame because it's not in one
Mhm.
particular instance. So that clarification was, excuse me, very helpful.
Yeah. Well, and I think we experience both. The distinction and the difference is so we'll use an example of maybe setting a boundary with your kid. So my daughter's 4.
Mhm,
And helping her establish boundaries and routines is part of my job.
mhm,
And so if we say, okay, if we do this again, this is the consequence. Like, I hear you. I understand this is a thing. Here's the safety rule, or here's whatever this boundary is. Therefore, if this thing happens, this is what the boundary is going to be. We're not going to be able to stay up and do this, or we're not going to have time to read 3 books because you're continually putzing and it's bedtime and there's a boundary. And so when those interactions happen at the end of the night, maybe if you've had a hard bedtime or you had a hard interaction with your school age kid when they came home and they're stressed and overwhelmed and you don't feel like you handled it well, if at the end of the night you're reflecting and you go, gosh, I don't like how I handled that.
mhm,
What could I have done differently? How could I show up? How could I talk to them in a different way? Or what maybe got triggered in me that made me feel so reactive? That's guilt driven. That's
mhm,
saying, okay, so gosh, that didn't feel good. What can we learn? How do we change? The shame piece, which is where we do feel it more and get stuck, is we ruminate on it without actually thinking of what can we do differently. We go, oh my gosh, I'm a terrible mom. I have to make up for this and this and this ways. The rules now become even more strict about how perfect you have to be the next day. You don't let it go. There's no sort of absolution from it. There's no forgiveness for the self. You're just adding it to the fire, saying there's even more fuel why you suck as a person. You're failing as a mom. So
mhm,
when you feel that first one, which we all do that, that's healthy, that's normal. When you get stuck in the second one, that's how we know that we're stuck in shame. And then our reactions to that shame just continue to perpetuate a cycle of having to make up for deficiencies rather than just learning and growing and trusting that process.
yeah. I love that differentiation because I think a lot of conversations I've had with fellow moms that work outside of the home, right, is, oh my gosh, I'm just not doing enough for my kids. I just
Right.
have enough time, so um, that is more of the shame side versus, okay, this specific instance, I wasn't there. How can I change that? Blah, blah, blah. And
Yes,
taking
absolutely.
action. So let's go back to that third question, which is
Mhm.
why do moms, or why does it feel like moms or women feel this more?
I think, so I can only speak to being in the United States. So obviously, different cultures, different communities have different perspectives, different norms around parenting, partnerships, all of those elements. And also just the way that they treat people and sort of the stories around gender roles. Again, going back to the layering, then, if we're going to talk about gender expression, socioeconomic status, race, religion, what we know is that traditionally speaking, and again, there's always room that there's exceptions for this, women have been conditioned in our culture that our job is to caretake. And if you go back and you think about, our grandparents, the sort of development of gender roles in certain things, there were natural roles
Mhm,
that people had. When you study those roles and when you study some of those things, what you see is that oftentimes the woman or the female's role was to be silent and to nurture and to caretake.
Mhm.
So that's sort of naturally passed through us. And for some people, they're like, that's great, that's fine. The sort of tricky part is it's become layered with different oppression based systems. That, we think about the patriarchy, we think about racism, we think about all these different layers. There's all of these expectations and these notches that basically say, it's not just that we have these roles that maybe our bodies are good at or they help us keep in balance. It's now the idea of you're inferior because of this part of your identity. So growing up and thinking about sort of how we were treated and maybe the conditions that were put on us, they're very different from maybe male counterparts. So that's one layer, is just adding in the fact that there are just different ways that people grew up. What we know then as a result of that is that for a lot of people that identify as female, and if we layer on their moms, or maybe they're going to be moms, want to be moms someday, if we go back even thinking about my story where it was, okay, I had emotional experiences and those emotional experiences were shut down. I'm sure every single person listening to this can raise their hand and say at some point I was called dramatic or too emotional as a teenager because I had a big feeling. I was going through a major developmental transition. I was getting my period and someone reduced it to me being too dramatic or me PMSing, which basically said that this is just something I've got to figure out because it's inconvenient. So then these layers come into play. On top of that, what we know is that if we're starting to absorb this, okay, you're a woman, you take care of people, you also have feelings, those feelings are inconvenient. If you think about that coming together with shame, what it's basically going to say is the expectation of the world around you is that you never have something that inconveniences other people. So, meaning your emotions, your wants, your needs. And your best bet to fit in is to succumb to this role, even if you don't like it, because it's what's going to allow you to be a part of the community. So, from the time we were little, we've been doing this. We were the friends. I mean, I'm sure most people listening are like, yep, I was the friend that listened to everybody's problems. I tried to help everybody. I would help out my teachers in class. Your sense of connection and usefulness came from that. So you grew up, you've been doing it, you got your first job. You're like, I'm going to be the yes person. For many of us, if we think about our jobs outside of the home, there was a job that we had that we were likely competing against other males, or we were competing against women and being made to feel like there's only a room for enough women to be here or like a certain number of women. So you have to be better. You have to do more. You have to overextend. So that translated into our schoolwork. That translated into our work again as an employee, or if you started a business, that was happening in your friendships. You were always trying to be the one that people called. You would immerse yourself in it. You would take it on in your relationships. You were likely the person that was absorbing more of that responsibility to take things on. So this wasn't like you had a kid and then suddenly you felt this more. You were doing it in all of these other roles already. You were already feeling like you weren't enough and that this is what it meant to be a good daughter, a good partner, a good friend, a good student, a good employee. Then you had a kid. And if we bring in social media, the messaging and the marketing is that it is a mom's job. I mean, the number of times if anyone is partnered to a male and if the male takes the kid to do something, like my husband is praised that he has taken my daughter to the park. I am never praised for taking my kids to the park. Usually, I feel like I am silently shamed for the outfit that I am wearing or the outfit my kid is wearing when we go to the park or whatever snack I pack or whatever it is. And so the marketing has been beautiful to uphold those systems to keep us feeling like our job is to do it all, to maintain everything. And so when we absorb this role as mom, we go, oh my goodness, there's this tiny little human and you've likely already built up the system with the people around you, your partner, if you're partnered, your friends, your support network, where you take care of everything. So they're not even used to asking you if you're okay or stepping in to take over. So then when you do feel like you're drowning, the storyline internally is, well, you better figure this out. You better apply all those same skills. You can't be the one that's struggling. And look at this helpless human. Layered on top of that, the people around you aren't even used to asking the question. Those two things coming together lay the foundation for moms to then take it to another level of, okay, I've got to figure this out. No one is going to be there. I can't count on that. And then we develop these very rigid rules and ideals about how these relationships will work. And we don't even believe we have the right to change them. So I know I'm layering in a lot of pieces right now, so I'll pause, but essentially the short answer to your question is because prior to becoming moms, we've already conditioned ourselves to take on the role that we are the ones that are responsible to fix and do everything for everyone else. So when you become a parent, it's already ripe for you to feel it 10 times more for this little thing that you love so much and feeling like it becomes your job. And when you've already conditioned yourself to say nothing, you don't believe you have the right now because you've told yourself this is my responsibility.
So many things. I laughed when you said the comment about the outfit because
Yeah.
it's not funny, but it's just we've all experienced it, right? And
Hmm.
it's too real. And I still vividly remember we do not let my coworker live this down because he said, "Oh, I have to go home because I have to babysit my kid." And we're like, "It is
Oh,
not." All the women were just going, "It is not babysitting when it's your own kid,"
yep.
Um, so he learned from that and never said anything of that nature again. But there are just these comments, right? People don't intend these things, but there's just this set mindset. I know I've also had like a comment where my husband was making dinner and they were like, "Oh, that's so nice that your husband is making dinner," to your point of men getting praise, right? For these
Right.
normal things that we do, that are unseen, that are just expected of a lot of women. And so it's definitely these reiterations of the cultural norm or expectations that then you could take that in and say, "Oh, I'm supposed to be doing this," or "I'm falling short because I'm not," and just
Well, and
perpetuate
you
that.
see it. I mean, I think about my husband works in emergency medicine. And so when he'll talk about people that he works with, if he talks about a nurse, we've
Mhm.
paid attention to this over the years. My automatic bias is that it's a female.
Yeah.
If he talks about an attending, my automatic bias is that it's a male. I've worked on it. I challenge that and I'll use they, them pronouns until and sometimes he's not identifying their gender because it doesn't actually matter to the story. But if you notice that, we have these default ideas. Even when I think about when I see a dog, I have a default assumption of what that's going to be. Like if there's a character in a story and like, oh, what's that? Well, he's a dog that does these things. Like you see these automatic things come out. And so when people are making those comments, it feels really hurtful and dismissive. And it's an extension of those automatic thoughts. We were at a science museum the other day. My daughter walked ahead. I am practicing allowing her to get a little bit further ahead of me right now, which is for anyone that has someone around that 4 or 5 age when they're doing that. Oh, it's so overwhelmingly scary. And you have to do it. But I'm like, okay, you need to have eyes on mom the whole time. And I'll kind of linger back and see how she handles it. This woman or female presenting person came up to her and said, "Where's mom?" Immediate assumption was, "Where's mom?" Because she saw this girl by herself and was like making sure. And I was like, huh, I just noticing that of like automatically we anchor on the mom as being the safe person. We anchor on the mom as being the person that does it all. So if that's the world messaging around you, and we know that shame is basically prioritizing keeping up with the messaging around you, you're going to feel that pressure. I'm supposed to be the one to do this. I think about a friend of mine the other day wanted to, I forget even, she was going to go to Goodwill. And she said, it's the first time I'm going to Goodwill without kids since we had been talking about Goodwill for months. And somehow we got to the conversation of her basically feeling bad asking her partner to be with the kids so she could go do those things for a few hours. I said, but what's interesting to me is I know him and I know that he would say, "Oh my gosh, thanks for asserting what you want. Yes, like I've got the kids, go do this." So what stops you? That's the shame. The shame isn't so much just what everybody else around you is thinking. Cause sure, like that comment from your coworker, he didn't mean it the way it came out. It was just a reductive statement. He's, of course, maybe going to go home and do that. And it might feel a little bit hard for him because maybe he hasn't been primed that that's the norm, is that he comes home from work and takes care of his kids. But it's also the internal story. And she feels bad if she's not the one taking her kids to all these things. She feels bad if she's asking her husband to take care of that stuff. That's the problem. It isn't that other people are expecting it, it's that we've come to see that as the expectation and the norm, and we don't even give ourselves the opportunity to do it differently.
Yeah. I think this is a great segue into how do we break these or shame stories and develop that shame resilience that you talk about?
So I think, again, if we sort of summarize that shame is the fear, this perpetual, pervasive fear that we are not good enough, we are not worthy and lovable of connection and belonging. If we just want to think about this as moms for a second, the idea that we are not a good enough mom, we're a bad mom, we're failing as a mom, whatever that story is, the first step is to admit that you feel that way. And I think that's incredibly important because I think for many of us in this hustle culture, in this like high functioning, but consistently burnt out culture, we've absorbed a responsibility that we just have to try a little bit harder and things will be okay.
Mhm.
It's never going to feel okay because your belief underneath all of it is that you are broken. So we can't just read the next BuzzFeed article about 5 boundaries you can set at work and you're suddenly going to feel better about your work life balance. We can't just go to Instagram and find this one person's idea of this new sensory bin that you can do with your kids or these nature hacks and you're suddenly going to feel like a good mom because the doing is not the issue, it's the belief underneath. So, part one is to admit that you feel this way. And again, go back and think about each night, how are you talking to yourself? Or after a difficult incident, or when you have a really positive incident, how are you talking to yourself? The second part is to really do the investigative work to figure out, where is this coming from? Why is it that I personally, because again, we can look at culture, we can say cultural norms, but for everybody, there's specific storylines within that that made us feel that way. So, where were you conditioned? Whose voices do you hear in your head if you're being honest? And when did that start to shift for you? And I think being honest with, and how did that work for you? Because for many of us, we won't do something if it doesn't feel like it worked. So, for a period of time, it felt like, well, yeah, I was getting recognition at work. I've gotten the promotions. People take me seriously because I work 85 hours a week, because I'm always on my email. So in your brain, then it's not just the stimulus, but the response. So
Mhm.
now that trigger is matched with this expectation and this thing that you go, but I don't want to lose that.
Mhm.
So I think it's then being really honest about those pieces and realizing the fear. Because if I said, well, just stop doing those things, stop packing these lunches. There's this person I follow on Instagram because it's so comedic to me that she packs these lunches the way she does. And good on her if that brings her joy. But mostly I feel really sad because I feel like the perpetuation is this idea that someone is going to have the money to invest in all of these crinkle cut cutters and these fancy things and 17 different lunch boxes to go with the color or the theme of the week. And they're printing their own stickers and so I find joy in it because it makes me laugh because it feels like it's got to be an ironic play on how ridiculous the expectations
Mhm.
are.
Mhm.
But if I were to say to somebody, stop packing their lunches,
Mhm.
stop, you know what? What if you didn't take them on an event? What
Mhm.
if you didn't put them in 16 activities? And when I think about the values for me and I think about what I wanted and was looking for growing up, I never needed perfect caregivers. I
Mhm.
never needed them to never screw up or get it wrong. What I really wish I would have had more of is a resolution, a
Mhm.
complete cycle. And that's one of the things that we also struggle with when we're in shame is we don't complete those cycles of feeling, of connection, of resolve. We just internalize it and feel like we have to fix it because again, we're the problem. And so now a lot of my things that I think about are I screwed up. How do I model to my kid how to healthily own that
Mhm.
without pushing it off as everybody else's fault or making it only my fault? And those two things help me then when we have a hard interaction to be able to come back and be like, whew, I did not handle that the way that I wanted to. Here's what I learned. And here's how I want to be better next time. What did you learn from that interaction? And it starts to create shared ownership over how an interpersonal dynamic goes. And for many of us, the vulnerability piece, maybe with our kids, it'll feel easier, but with a lot of the adults, with our partners, our friends, our parents, the vulnerability pieces in that conversation you're not going to take on all responsibility. In fact, you're going to open up the door for them to take theirs. And you're going to start having a conversation about how things have to shift. But if you can anchor it back on your values of if I don't do this, what am I teaching my daughter?
Yeah.
If I don't do this, how miserable am I going to be? And what's the next level when you talked about sort of that upward trajectory and wanting to keep learning and growing? I know I'm gonna fall flat on my face if I keep doing this because 'cause I've watched myself do it, but the stakes seem to keep getting higher. I need to rethink a strategy or else it really is gonna be bad. The fall is gonna be too hard to come out of, and I don't wanna condition a way of living that keeps making it feel like that's my only option, is to keep falling and scrambling to get back up and still feeling like I have to do it alone or hide it from people so that they don't judge me for feeling like I fell.
Oh, I love that you brought it to modeling for our kids because I was going to talk about that as well, where we, in our imperfection, when we can own that, it is such a huge thing, right? I don't know how many times I've had to go to my kids. I'm crying because, like, there's something important to me that I wanted them to understand, but I didn't handle it well. So I said,
Mhm.
Mommy's coming from this place. I didn't handle that well. Like,
Yeah.
can we just talk about this, And I don't want them to think that I'm perfect and that they have to be perfect because nobody is perfect, right? And being able to show, like you were saying, how we deal with the ways that things didn't go as planned or that we expected
Mhm.
ourselves to show up is huge. And if we can give our kids these skills at an earlier age, and especially because
Mhm.
I have two boys, right? And boys stereotypically have been told you need to be like strong, you need to not show your emotions,
Stoic.
you need to
Yeah.
be, all of this. And I don't want that for my children. They need to be able to show it in a healthy way. And so if I can model anything for them at a young age to have those skills, that would be huge.
And I think maybe even that, if people are like, okay, this has been a great conversation, I still feel very overwhelmed in the entire process. Like, I'm with you, I've got shame, but I need it even simpler. A small tweak we can even make in our day to day. So we did this with watching movies or reading books where they'll talk about like a villain or a bad guy. And that's always the way that it's talked about. And so our storyline, the first movie I really ever watched was Frozen. And so when we watched Hans in the movie, and she's like, so that's the bad guy. And I said, no, that's a person who's doing really unhelpful or unkind or mean things. And so then she'll say, well, does he learn to be nice? And we had this whole conversation about these things. I was like, well, in the movie, we don't get to see that. How could we write the story? What does he have to learn? The interesting thing that we've learned is that for most of us, power and money are the things that make us there because they're scarcity driven elements that if we are afraid we don't have enough power, which is ultimately connection or stake in a room, or money feeling like we're not going to be secure enough, that's what drives us to do those unhelpful, unkind things. But when we would watch movies, that's how we would talk about it.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean that, Princess Tiana never does anything hurtful or harmful. In fact, let's point out a couple of the things that happened in the movie where she actually made some judgments and was kind of unkind. That doesn't mean she's a bad person. That doesn't mean she's a good person. We're talking about a person neutrally that does things that are sometimes kind, unkind, good, bad, whatever.
Mhm.
Same thing now if you think about your kids at school and they're talking about kids at school or themselves. There is no such thing as a good kid or a bad kid there. There's not just, well, that's a really mean kid. The rule now in our house is if she comes home and something negative did happen with a kid, she absolutely gets to talk to me about that, gets to process what that was like. They did something mean, but we talk about it as what they did and
Mhm.
then we also talk about tell me something that is kind about them, or tell me something nice that they did, or just tell me something about them that isn't a negative. And by doing that, what I'm helping her see is the context of a full person. We translate that then to her, how we talk about her. If we're all being honest, our kids have done at least 462 things that suck real bad. And
Yeah.
that it's very hard to want to interact with them. And you look at it like, that's just mean, or that's just this, or whatever. You've not reduced your kid to saying, well, see, they suck. They're
Mhm.
just a bad kid. So this is who they are. Instead, you look at that and you have to see them of that evolution. The final layer for you is if you can bring it to you and you go, maybe I feel like I sucked in that moment. In that moment, I felt like I was a bad mom. Again, now can you shift it from shame to guilt? What about that's making me feel that way? And what can I take from that to keep growing and evolving? And in the context of my full life, could I give myself a little bit more grace to realize maybe my kids have been waking up in the middle of the night every single night for 3 weeks because one or more of them has had a cold, and I've been slammed at work, and I've had this really crappy interaction with someone around me, and I haven't talked about it. I haven't dealt with it. I'm feeling like I'm failing in every area of my life. But instead of releasing that, I'm holding that pressure. Of course, then it's going to come out here. That
Mhm.
makes sense. So, what do I need to change in all these other areas of my life so that doesn't keep happening? That's how we make that shift to you're not a bad mom. Sometimes you're a mom who doesn't handle things really well. And guess what? That makes you human.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is such a freedom in this hard work of getting there, right? And then also being able to ask for the things that we need to get us to that place, whether it is support from our partner to have that alone time to process or to go do the things that we need to keep our sanity. Because without that support, that community that you were talking about, it's hard to get to that place where um, we feel like we are doing a good job or that we even feel like ourselves,
Hmm.
right? Whatever that was, because in our different roles, we tend to lose who we are. It's just become our identity of this is what we're supposed to do. This is who I'm supposed to be. Um,
Hmm.
I know we want to move to this joy, this um, fulfilled life. Is there anything else you want to leave our moms with to get
I,
there?
I think a lot of the idea that's perpetuated in many different, we'll just say sort of the wellness sector as a whole, is that pain, whatever that is, if it's shame in this context, if it's feeling like you're not managing your time well, whatever it is, that it's all a solvable issue. So if you just do X, then it's going to be solved and you're going to be good at this. What we're talking about here is an emotional issue. Shame is always going to be a part of the story because fear is an emotion. It's not going anywhere. So you're always going to have the invitation to go back to that story. I think one of the things we can do is if instead we think about resilience instead of absolution. So when I feel shame, how do I respond to it? When I feel taxed in my schedule, how do I respond to it? Instead of this should never happen again because I'm going to learn everything and be done. So I think if you can just come to that place of realizing you are going to feel like things are hard for the rest of your life. Again, go back to that idea of radical acceptance. You get to control how you respond to that. And if when you're feeling overwhelmed, you throw your hands up and you're mean, or you just completely detach and you avoid and you don't do anything, that's your choice. You can also choose to step back and be like, okay, this is happening. How do I want to show up? What do I want to do? And so, really thinking about resilience, really thinking about small, I like to call them 1% changes. You've been acting and doing this way. Let's say this is the first time you're hearing about shame, then however old you are right now, you've spent that many years existing under this storyline and it's only gotten stronger over time. Give yourself grace and space to realize you're not going to undo it from listening to one 30-minute seminar. You're not going to undo it in one summit. What you do from the summit is you say, what's my 1% I'm going to take and I'm going to work on moving forward? And how am I going to celebrate when I make that 1% shift? Once that's there, okay, great. What's that next 1% shift? And you take those micro steps to really allow yourself that grace and space to evolve in a way that feels good to you instead of it really ultimately being about your shame, saying, well, no, we've just identified a problem and you need to fix it as quickly as possible.
Oh, I love that. And we always like to end with giving our moms this one tangible, quick action step that they can take today to feel like they can get a win or at least start moving. Because it can be overwhelming to hear all of this and go, I don't know where to start. So, do you have an action or challenge for our moms today?
I think that what I would suggest is to try every day to set an alarm on your phone every day for a week. And you're going to give yourself 1 minute. That's it, just 60 seconds. And when that alarm goes off, you're going to stop and you're going to say one thing that you're grateful for and one thing that you're proud of yourself for. What we know is that gratitude is an antidote to shame because gratitude opens the tunnel. Instead of it being all about you and you being the problem, you're thinking about the world as a whole. So it helps take that off. Once you've taken that off a little bit, now we're going to call out, okay, you feel like everything sucks. Everything you do is terrible. We're going to call out one thing just to, again, introduce the possibility that maybe not everything you do is terrible. So again, set an alarm, 7 days, try it out. One thing you're grateful for, and one thing that you're proud of yourself for every day for that time, and just see how it feels after that week.
That sounds great. I know you have a fantastic freebie for everyone. Can you share what that is and how people can connect with you further?
Yeah, absolutely. So, first off, if you are wanting to connect, learn more about shame, diving deeper in any way, I would say the best place to go is my website. So, adversityrising.com. You'll find links there to my YouTube channel where I post weekly videos to kind of help support in this 1% change process. A link to my podcast where you can dive deeper into shame stories and kind of build community around understanding what that is. And then also seeing the other work that I do. In terms of a freebie, I really wanted to support that reflection process because for many of us, again, we want to go to, well, I want to fix it. I don't want to feel the pain. I don't want to feel this way anymore. Recognizing that the best gift we can give ourselves is the willingness to be in the pain and explore a different way to relate to it. So there's a handout that everyone will have. So I'm going to give you a little bit of both. First is a thought, basically a thought exploration worksheet. What we're going to do is look at how you're talking to yourself every day and start exploring how much of that is negative and how much of that we're assuming to be truth instead of opinion. And start to bring in some of that doubt around there to realize, well, yeah, if you're saying these things to yourself all day long, of course you're going to feel this way. So we're building a little bit of compassion at the same time that we're building some of that insight. I will say, I'm going to encourage you to do that one first, and it's going to suck. It's very hard to do that one. It's a necessary intro step to doing some of that deeper work and evolution. The second thing that I want to give everyone is a self care handout. Basically, it explains what self care is. We know that shame has basically conditioned us to believe that anything we do for ourselves, like my friend I mentioned in the beginning who just wanted an hour at Goodwill by herself, we feel bad for that. And we come up with all these reasons why we can't and we shouldn't do it. And it isn't just you should take a bubble bath and feel okay with it. Sometimes it's saying you can say no to somebody and feel okay with it. And that is self care. So I'm going to give you all a worksheet on self-care that basically talks a little bit more about what it is. And then there's over 50 different ways that you can practice self-care. That's basically kind of a little exploration kit that you get to use where you can go in and you can try one out and take notes of how it felt and what worked and what didn't. So you can start to get a feel for when you do these things, does it feel good? Because I'm never going to be the person that takes a bubble bath and I feel better. That's not who I am. But I am the person that when I set a boundary, when I put a limit, when I say no to something that I don't want to do, that lights me up more than anything. Or when I ask for help or I offload a task, that's my self care. So once you can get clear with what that is, it feels a little bit easier to bring that into your day to day.
And we'll have all the links attached as well. And so you'll be able to quickly find Kira. But I just want to expand on one of the things you mentioned because we say offloading as if it's kind of a bad thing or we feel like
Hmm.
we're taking on someone else. But it's actually been in our home when we talked about it. My husband felt like I trusted him to do things and he wanted to do more. He just didn't know how to. And I also had to, once I had him own something, really own it and not manage it and say, oh,
Yeah,
what do you do? Because that is just not helpful to try to do it my way when I've asked him to help with something. And so I think releasing and seeing how people actually enjoy doing those things and helping out and taking a part of it. And that goes for kids too. I'm all about kids' life skills and
absolutely.
see their faces light up when they actually are entrusted to do something. And so I just encourage moms to find those ways to take things off of our plate and see how it could be a win-win all around.
I love that.
Anything else you want to share with our moms?
I think I have sufficiently overloaded their brain with information for the day. And so
Perfect.
I think we're good. And just I think that the one thing I guess I'll say then is if you are feeling like, okay, I know this hits, but I don't know where to go with it, use the website link, email me. Let's circle back. Let's figure out what that looks like for you because this is a lot. And recognizing that the expectation isn't now that you're supposed to solve this on your own because we pointed it out. This is why we have communities of people doing work like this summit to bring in supports to remind you that we're all doing this. We're here for you. And we're going to need you to be here for us in the same way because we're all trying to figure it out.
We're all imperfect. It takes a village. That's that saying for a reason.
Hmm.
Thank you, Kira, for sharing with us all the information we need to learn and figure out about shame and especially develop that shame resilience. And remember, everyone, you can still upgrade to that VIP pass so you can keep these talks forever. You can keep coming back to it because there's always so much more to unpack. I learn new things every time I listen to things over and over again. You also get exclusive speaker bonuses with that. And go do the challenge. Share with us in the Facebook group how it went for you because we want to answer your questions. We want to journey alongside you. And if you do it, it's not going to be perfect, right? And we're all going to have those stories where we can encourage one another through this journey of motherhood and just life. So thank you for being here and be sure to come back for more amazing summit speakers. Thank you, Kira.